get started by reviewing how to calculate a fraction of a whole number. Example: making a batch of 12 muffins requires 3 cups of flour. If you only want to make 1/2 of the recipe, or 6 muffins, how much flour would you need? In order to solve this problem, we need to scale all of the ingredients in the original recipe down by a factor of 1/2, which means that we must calculate 1/2 of 3 cups in order to find the amount of flour that's required to make half of the recipe. Now we have 2 ways that we can do this. First, we can solve this problem numerically because we know that 1/2 of 3 is equal to 1/2 times 3. Using our strategies that we learned in a previous lesson, 1/2 times 3 is equal to 1 times 3 all over 2, which is equal to 3 over 2, or 1.5. But let's not forget that we can also solve these types of problems using diagrams. And this is the strategy we would have used before we knew how to multiply a fraction in a whole number. We can use a rectangle to represent 1 cup of flour. So to represent 3 cups of flour, we would use 3 rectangles. To find 1/2 of this amount, we can shade 1/2 of the total area of the rectangles. Keep in mind that what we're essentially doing here is dividing 3 by 2. The result matches our numerical solution. Regardless of whether you solved this problem numerically or using a diagram, by now you should be comfortable solving problems of this nature. But what if this same recipe requires 3/4 of a block of butter? How would our logic change if we needed to find 1/2 of 3/4? Example: the same muffin recipe requires 3/4 of a block of butter. If you only want to make 1/2 of the recipe, how much butter would you require? First, we must identify that we are being asked to calculate 1/2 of 3/4. Now, we may not yet have a strategy to compute this result numerically, but we can always try solving this problem using a diagram. We must first use a diagram to show the fraction 3/4. If this rectangle represents 1 block of butter, then 3/4 of a block can be shown by dividing the butter into 4 parts and shading 3 of them. So how could we now find 1/2 of 3/4 using our diagram? We need to divide the shaded region into 2 equal parts. Then we further shade out one of these 2 equal parts using stripes. We now know that 1/2 of 3/4 is represented by the region that is both shaded and striped. But how much butter is this? What fraction of the whole block have we actually represented here? To answer these questions, we need to consider the entire rectangle in our diagram because it represents the whole block of butter. We can extend the horizontal line so that the block of butter is divided into 8 equal portions. Now we see that 3 of these 8 pieces are both shaded and striped, and this represents the amount of butter that we need to make half of this recipe. Therefore, 1/2 of 3/4 is equal to 3/8. Our final conclusion is that having the recipe requires 3/8 of a block of butter. Example: calculate 1/4 times 8/9. Remember when multiplying fractions that times means of, and so 1/4 times 8/9 means that we are being asked to calculate 1/4 of 8/9. This makes it very similar to our previous problem. So we start by solving this using a diagram. We create the fraction 8/9 by using a rectangle to represent one whole. Dividing this rectangle into 9 parts, and then we shade 8 of them. This image now represents the fraction 8/9. We now want to find 1/4 of the shaded region. To do this, we divide the shaded region into fourths. Then we further shade out one of the 4 parts using stripes. We now know that 1/4 of 8/9 is represented by the region that is both shaded and striped. The answer to our question, or the product, is the fraction of the area of the total rectangle that is shaded and striped. So we extend our horizontal line to produce 36 equal parts. And we notice that 8 of these parts are both shaded and striped. What this means is that 1/4 times 8/9 is equal to 8/36, which we can simplify to 2/9. Stop for a second and take a look at our answer and look at the diagram that we've used to get there. Take a moment to reflect. Is it clear from the diagram why the denominator is 36? Is it also clear from the diagram why the numerator is 8?